Hey there, fellow bookworms. Ready to level up your reading game? Today we're going deep, way past just finishing a book.
Yeah, think Reading Ninja. This is your secret decoder ring for unlocking those hidden layers of meaning in anything you read.
And our guide. This awesome piece, 7 tips to improve your reading at an advanced level. Practical advice, not just theory.
Totally. And it uses some really cool examples like switching between Great Gatsby and Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, to really stretch those reading muscles.
I love that, reading against the grain. It's so easy to stay in our comfort zones. What about you? What do you usually gravitate towards? What would be a surprising genre for you?
Oh, good question. I tend to lean towards nonfiction, history, biographies, that kind of thing. But to shake things up, maybe a graphic novel. Or poetry. I don't read a ton of poetry.
I get that. I love a good mystery, but I've been meaning to try more sci-fi, see what's out there. Which brings us to tip number 1, diversify your reading diet. The source is all about exploring different genres, styles, and topics.
Makes sense, right? Like food. You don't want to eat the same thing every day. You miss out on all those flavors and nutrients. Same with reading. Each genre has its own strengths, its own way of seeing the world.
Exactly. And they even suggest this cool activity. Read a news article on climate change, then read a poem on the same topic. See how different forms of writing can change your understanding.
That's such a good idea. The news article gives you the facts, right? But the poem might explore the emotional side, the impact on people. 2 totally different angles, but both important for understanding the whole picture.
Totally. Tip number 2 is all about active reading, something I'm always working on. It's about engaging with the text, not just skimming.
Yeah, that's where the magic happens. Active reading is like having a conversation with the author, asking questions, pushing back, making those connections in your own mind.
The source talks about the SQ3R method. Can you break that down for us? Why is it so helpful, especially with really complex texts?
I see SQ3R as a brain hack for better reading. It stands for survey, question, read, recite, review. Especially with dense stuff, it makes you slow down and engage on different levels. Like if you're reading the Federalist Papers, before diving in, you'd survey the structure, maybe skim headings or topic sentences.
So kind of setting the stage, getting an overview.
Exactly. Then you come up with questions based on what you see. What are the main points? What arguments is the author making? Now you're actively searching for answers as you read.
It's like a detective game.
Yes. Then the read phase, where you actively look for those answers.
Wait.
Next, you recite or summarize what you read in your own words. This helps solidify your understanding. And finally, review to make sure you remember the key points.
Intense, but it sounds super effective, especially for those brain bender books.
A mental workout, but a good one.
Okay, tip number 3 always gets me excited. Expanding our vocabulary. They suggest keeping a vocabulary journal, which sounds fun.
Like building your arsenal of words.
But what about those words that just completely stump you, like singularity in Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time? I remember just staring at that one, completely lost.
I know that feeling. You got to become a word detective. Context is everything. You can often figure out the meaning using root words, prefixes, suffixes, break it down into smaller parts.
Like solving a puzzle. And once you crack the code, that word unlocks a whole new level of understanding. I had that with epistemology in a philosophy book. I finally broke it down. Episteme meaning knowledge and logos meaning study. Boom, the study of knowledge.
It's the best feeling. And those aha moments build on each other. Every new word opens up more understanding. You can tackle even more complex stuff.
Brain leveling up. Tip number 4 is where it gets interesting. Author's craft. Understanding the why behind an author's choices.
It's like peeking behind the curtain, seeing the magician's secrets.
Totally. They use 1984 as an example how Orwell creates that feeling of oppression through his writing. What are some clues we can look for to get an author's purpose?
Oh, so many. Tone, imagery, sentence structure, rhetorical devices, they all add up. Like, think about it. A short, choppy sentence creates urgency, tension, right? But a long, flowing one might feel more thoughtful.
Like composing music with words. Using different instruments to create different effects.
Great analogy. And you, as the reader, start to pick up on those little cues. You see how everything plays a role. Word choice, pacing, even punctuation.
Like learning a secret language. They suggest analyzing a paragraph from Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse to really examine the sentence structure. I challenge you, try that with anything you're reading. Pick a passage and dissect it. It's amazing what you find.
I agree. Ask yourself, what choices are they making and why? You'll see patterns, appreciate the craft even more.
Okay, tip number 5 gets into summarizing and critical thinking. Essential skills for any advanced reader. I'll admit, sometimes I just want to get lost in the story, but slowing down to analyze is crucial too.
It's like the difference between watching a movie passively versus really engaging with it. When you summarize, you got to boil things down to the essence, really understand the main points. Critical thinking is about questioning assumptions, looking at different perspectives, and evaluating the evidence.
They talk about summarizing an article on AI, which is constantly changing. Imagine trying to sum up all those complex ideas.
It's a challenge.
Yeah.
But so valuable. Critical thinking is even more important now. We're bombarded with information from everywhere. You got to be able to tell fact from opinion, bias from objectivity.
It's about being a smart consumer of information, not just believing everything you read.
Exactly. And a great way to practice those skills is joining a book club or discussion group.
Have you ever read Thoreau's Civil Disobedience? Talk about sparking debate. Those ideas about individual conscience versus the state are still so relevant. Imagine discussing that in a book club. Things could get heated in a good way.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that one. A book club is like having your own team of experts to bounce ideas off of. You hear different interpretations, challenge your own assumptions. You might discover things you missed on your own.
It's like having multiple lenses to view the same material. Plus, you might find new authors or genres you wouldn't have tried otherwise. And it's just fun to geek out with other book lovers.
Totally. It's a built-in support system for your reading journey.
Speaking of support, ready for tip number 6. This one might surprise you. Reading aloud.
I know, right? It sounds a bit counterintuitive, but trust me, there are benefits, especially for complex texts.
They even suggest trying it with Shakespearean sonnets to appreciate the rhythm and flow, like adding another dimension to the words.
It is. It forces you to slow down, enunciate clearly, savor the language. Especially helpful with poetry, but even with prose it makes a difference. Imagine tackling a dense philosophical argument out loud. It becomes so much clearer.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. It's like using more of your senses to engage with the material.
Exactly. And remember, we learned language through sound first. Reading aloud taps into that. Plus, think about when we were kids reading aloud together. We learned so much that way.
I loved those read alouds in school. And the source even says, record yourself reading aloud and listen back.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
It might feel awkward, but it's a fantastic way to see where you stumble, work on pronunciation, improve fluency, like your own personal coach.
I'm adding that to my toolkit. Okay, our final tip. Goal setting. I'm all about goals, but sometimes I'm not sure where to start, especially with something as broad as reading.
I get that. The source uses War and Peace as an example, which is a big one. But they have a great point. Break down big goals into smaller chunks.
So instead of I'm going to read War and Peace, it's I'm going to read 50 pages a week.
Exactly. It feels much less scary.
Yeah.
And you get that sense of accomplishment as you hit those smaller milestones.
And there are great tools to help you track your progress. I love Goodreads. It's so motivating to see what you've read, find new books, share your thoughts.
It's a great community for book lovers.
Yeah.
And speaking of community, they mentioned book clubs again. There's nothing like connecting with other readers and really diving deep together.
It's like a cheering squad for your reading journey. So we've covered a lot. Diversifying our reading, active reading, vocabulary, author's craft, summarizing, reading aloud, and goal setting. It's been quite the exploration of becoming a more advanced reader.
It has. And I hope our listeners feel inspired to take their reading to that next level.
Me too. You know, as we wrap up this part, it makes me think about the power of reading. It's not just about knowledge. It's about understanding the world and ourselves better.
That's beautifully put. It's about empathy, critical thinking, opening ourselves up to new perspectives and possibilities.
Exactly. And it's a journey that never really ends. There's always something new to discover, a new connection to make.
And with the right tools and techniques, we can keep growing as readers our whole lives.
I love that. So, as we wrap up this segment of our deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought. What's one book or article you've always wanted to read, but felt intimidated by?
What's that one that's been sitting on your shelf, whispering promises of adventure?
Maybe it's a classic, a dense philosophical work, or something scientific that's always intrigued you. Now is the time to embrace the challenge.
Use the tips we've discussed and approach it with confidence, curiosity, a sense of adventure. You might be surprised.
Now, before we move on to part 2, we want to hear from you. What's one aha moment you've had while reading? Share your stories, your insights, your favorite reading techniques. We'll be back soon with more on how to level up your reading game.
That reminds me of when I was wrestling with this really dense philosophy book, And I was just stuck. I tried recording myself reading it aloud just to see. And honestly,
What happened?
it was like someone else was reading. I picked up on all these things I totally missed before.
It's amazing how just changing how you interact with the text can do that. Like unlock it. Speaking of unlocking, tip number 6 is all about reading aloud.
Yeah, I know, right? Sounds a bit old school.
Yeah, like elementary school. But the source makes a good case for it, especially for becoming more advanced readers.
Certainly.
They even suggest reading Shakespeare out loud, like those sonnets,
Oh, yeah.
to get the rhythm and flow. What's the idea there?
When you read silently, don't you think you kind of skim? Your mind races ahead.
Oh, for sure.
But reading aloud, you got to slow down, enunciate every word, really savor the language. Like it adds this whole other dimension.
Almost like performing it, bringing it to life. So you pick up on those subtle things you might miss otherwise.
Exactly. And it's not just poetry. Think about a tough philosophical argument or even a legal document. Reading it aloud can make it so much clearer.
Okay, I see what you're saying. It's like using more of your senses to really engage with it, which helps you remember it better too.
Right. And we learn language through hearing first, don't we? Yeah. So reading aloud kind of taps into that. Plus, it's like when we were kids reading aloud together.
Yeah.
Remember how much we absorbed?
I do. Those were great. And the source even says to try recording yourself reading aloud and listening back.
I know, it sounds a little weird.
Yeah, but it could be really helpful.
Absolutely. You can hear where you trip up, work on pronunciation, get more fluent overall. It's like having your own personal coach.
I'm going to try that. Okay, last tip from the source. Goal setting. I'm a huge believer in goals, but I'm not always sure where to begin with reading. It can feel so overwhelming.
I understand that. They use War and Peace as an example, which, yeah.
That's a big one, intimidating. But their point is, break it down.
Exactly. So instead of I'm going to read War and Peace, maybe it's I'm going to read 50 pages a week.
Right. Way less daunting.
And you get that feeling of accomplishment as you hit those smaller goals.
Which keeps you motivated. And there are great tools to help, like Goodreads. I love that. Seeing your progress, finding new books, sharing your thoughts.
It's such a great community for book lovers. And that brings us back to community in general, right?
Yeah. Book clubs, online groups, even just friends you swap books with. It makes a difference.
Totally. Having other readers around you, it's like a support system.
A cheering squad for your reading.
I like that. And with all this talk about tips and goals, it's important to remember reading should be fun.
Oh, absolutely.
We can get so caught up in improving that we forget to enjoy a good book.
So true. It shouldn't feel like work.
It's like anything else. You got to find that sweet spot between challenge and pleasure.
All right. We've done a deep dive on these 7 tips, but before we go, I want to ask you, the listener, what really stuck with you?
Was there one that was like, aha, that's it?
Or maybe a challenge you're ready to tackle now?
We want to hear your thoughts. Reading is a journey, and the best ones are shared.
So let's keep talking. What are your favorite ways to level up your reading game? We'll be back with more soon. So we've been talking about all these great tips for becoming better readers. But sometimes, even with the best techniques, you just hit a wall.
For sure.
You get those books, those articles, even just certain paragraphs, and you're like, ugh, this is a struggle.
Yeah.
And it can be so discouraging. You're excited to read something new, and then it just doesn't click. What do you do when you run into that, when you're just not connecting?
Well, first you got to remember, it's okay. It's normal to struggle with certain things.
Right.
It doesn't mean you're a bad reader or that the writing is bad. Sometimes it's just not a good fit for you.
I like that, giving yourself permission to not love everything.
Exactly. Once you accept that, you can look at those tougher texts with more, maybe a little kindness towards yourself and curiosity.
So instead of getting frustrated, you ask, okay, what's making this hard for me?
Yeah. Is it the vocabulary, the sentences, the topic itself?
Right.
And once you figure out what it is, you can start to find ways to deal with it. Vocabulary. Maybe you grab the dictionary or look for clues in the surrounding words. Tricky sentences. Break them down into smaller parts. Or read them aloud. See if the rhythm helps.
You're like a reading detective, using your tools to crack the case.
I love that. And sometimes the best thing is to just walk away for a bit.
Oh, yeah.
Go for a walk, listen to music, do something completely different. Come back with fresh eyes.
That distance can really help. It's like with a painting, you step back to see the whole picture.
Exactly. And honestly, remember that reading should be fun. If you're always fighting with it, feeling frustrated, Maybe it's time to try something else.
I agree. A different genre, a new author, or even an old favorite that always makes you happy. There's so many amazing books out there. There's something for everyone.
For sure. The important thing is to find what you're curious about, what sparks your imagination.
You know, as we wrap up this whole deep dive into reading, it keeps coming back to this. It's so personal.
It really is.
We can learn techniques, we can get better at it, but at the end of the day, it's that connection you make with what you're reading.
It's like connecting with another mind, even if they lived centuries ago, exploring new worlds, understanding ourselves and the universe better.
A journey of discovery. And like all good journeys, the best thing is to go with curiosity, a sense of wonder, and be open to getting a little lost along the way.
Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never lose that sense of wonder. That's the magic of reading.
That's all for this episode of The Deep Dive. We hope you found some inspiration to level up your reading game. Until next time, happy reading.